So I just want to talk about the BNR update coming on the 30th briefly. What I expect to happen, or what I think will happen. The only thing that I can take off the table for sure is a no ban scenario. Um, that is mostly because in their June 30th update, they've said that the issue is that despite having several different decks, blah blah. But if you pause and read this highlighted part, basically what they're saying is that control is absent. And we're back in this place where control is largely absent. So in their last BNR, they stated specifically that one of their goals was to have control come back and that they saw an imbalance in the metagame. And we're basically at this point of imbalance again. So unless they've for whatever reason in the last 3 months decided that that's no longer something that's important to them, looking at this metagame, the conditions for a ban are pretty much there again. There's no way to argue that this is imbalanced, and it's a very, very combo heavy. The meta it is. So that brings us to what can reasonably go away. I think the first thing that should go is Oops All Spells. In their ban update too, they said they'd keep an eye on in this ban update. If I find Oops here real quick, they basically mentioned they'd be keeping an eye on both the play rates and the win rates of the Oops deck. The issue is that at least from where the metagame currently sits, Oops's win rate and play percentage have gone down to just 4%. Now, that being said, Legacy, they've acknowledged, is a format where they listen to player feedback, and there are an awful lot of people who do not like the Oops deck. So I think if they only look at it from a metagame perspective, it would be hard to argue for Oops going. But I think the deck has also attracted a lot of vitriol from the player base for being so uninteractive and so unenjoyable to play against that my guess is that there's probably enough player unhappiness in the format to actually see this thing get kicked out for better or worse. So first on my bans, I think what's going to happen is they're going to take out one or both of the Balustrade's buy effects. I kind of hope it's both, so I don't have to play against this deck again, but we'll see. It could go either way, but I think it is going to end up going because it's the deck has its on Reddit and everything. You see people like defending it, and it's just I get what they're saying, but at the end of the day, it's just not a very interesting deck to play against. So that's the Oops bans, or if they happen at all. Reanimator. Reanimator is another one of the situations where I feel like they've painted themselves in a corner. If you read what they say about this, you can pause if you want, but the TLDR is that they view Reanimator as being an important part of the metagame, but they also acknowledge that they want Reanimator decks to be all in and not have like these mid-rangey kind of jukes to them. So the issue with this is that we're kind of back in the same place again 3 months later. The mid-range plan is definitely worse, sans Troll of Khazad-dûm, but the deck still has Bowmasters, it still has Murktides, it still has that Ninja, Kaito. So the deck still has a very viable mid-range plan in addition to the combo out, which per Wizard's own words, shouldn't exist. So this kind of forks them between two options. So it kind of goes down to how they view cards like Entomb. Personally, I think the problem with this deck is that people have realized that there's a great hybridization between a tempo deck and a combo deck smushed into one. Like, Delver is great and all, but hey, what if your Delver could like reanimate itself out or reanimate as like an I win button, right? And that's kind of what we're looking at here. Or I guess another way you could look at it is, hey, what if my Reanimator deck could like grind with like a Tamiyo and not just lose to like the first piece of, surgical extraction or, whatever the opponent happens to see. And the problem is, I think that hybridization, now that it's been discovered, isn't going away. So if you really want to ban this deck out, you basically have to take Entomb or maybe Reanimate, but you have to hit the engine and convince people that like just shoving the small Reanimator package in all your tempo style blue black decks isn't going to work anymore. And I don't think you're going to convince people that unless Entomb goes. So, why won't they ban Entomb? Well, here they've basically said that they feel the Entomb card specifically, or Reanimator in general, is, I think the word they use is iconic, but you can read it. It's part of what they view as core legacy. So what is important though is that a lot of the ban discussion this time has gone kind of sideways in a lot of which ways, because there's not real clarity on what Entomb status in the format is. Um, Wizards says iconic, says it's been around for a long time with regards to Entomb, but they haven't said pillar. And if you've heard people throw around the term pillar, it largely comes from this tweet. This is why the arguments for Brainstorm don't go anywhere, because Wizards has said it's a pillar of the format, therefore it's here to stay. If you don't like that, then, frankly, if you don't like Brainstorm, then frankly, Legacy is probably not the format for you. Now, they haven't used this word with Entomb. So the confusing part, therefore, is that people don't necessarily know, like, what is Entomb? Like, is it a pillar? Is it iconic? And a lot of the arguments just end up, like, circling the drain around, like, well, what is it? So I guess for my wish list on this ban list, among other things, is that they would just tell us where Entomb is. If Entomb is a pillar, then agree or disagree, at least we know. Like, we're not, like, wasting time arguing with them when, WotC thinks it's a pillar. Um, so that clarity, I think, would do a lot to drive discussion in a more productive direction. So let's assume that it's not a pillar for the time being. Well, then it's quite possible that Entomb is on the block. We've had 3 consecutive ban cycles, 9 months of the blue-black Reanimator deck being at the top. Like, not near the top, at the top. That's 9 months of play. And this would be the 4th, so the last year, essentially. And we're still, like, arguing about this thing. So maybe if Entomb isn't a pillar, and if WotC is tired of, like, this thing floating at the top, there's honestly one of the best chances that I've seen of Entomb going away. So if they actually want to solve the problem, it's Entomb. Now, if they come out and say, or internally they believe for whatever reason that Entomb is a pillar, then you kind of can only attack the mid-rangey plan, which, again, according to their statement here, the blue-black deck shouldn't have. And the core elements of that are probably going to be either Tamiyo or Bowmaster, and it's going to be pick one. I kind of vote Bowmaster, but because it's a lock piece that punishes you while you try and find your outs for the Reanimator half of the deck. But there's a really good case to be made for Tamiyo too, and if either one of them went, I wouldn't be that upset about it. The other, I don't know, quote unquote good thing to note is that this would hit both the blue-black Reanimator and the blue-black Tempo Shell, so it would just generally take a lot out of blue-black, which is generally just eating up a lot of the meta right now. I think it's like, if you combine these decks, they combine for like nearly 30% of the meta, and you definitely feel that in leagues where like at least 2 or 3 matches of every league is going to be like an Underground Sea strategy of some flavor. It's not very fun, but it is what it is. The only issue with that approach is that I don't think hitting the tempo plan like that is going to work, because they're just going to slot in the next best thing. Like I said, the cat's kind of out of the bag about these tempo mid-range hybrids with a combo out. So, just banning out like the next best mid-range threat is probably just going to see them put in another one. There's been some talk about banning Atraxa, but I also don't particularly think that just banning the fatties they Entomb is going to be a really good direction either, quite frankly. Okay, so those are the options that I think are on the table. If I were a betting man, I would probably say both pieces of Oops and Bowmaster are probably what they end up banning. I think that's consistent with how WotC does these light touches. But I think if WotC, and I hope this is the case, but I'll have to see it to believe it. If they actually want to solve the problem, then it's the ban list I actually want is both of the Oops, Balustrade, Spy Effects, and Entomb. I think that resets the format pretty good. And I think one thing that I have seen said, but I don't know if anyone realizes, is that the next ban list update is going to coincide with 2 weeks before Eternal Weekend. And at that point, they're not likely going to want to touch the format very much, if at all. Um, Understandably so, because people are, flying to these tournaments, and you don't want to like ban their deck out from under them 2 weeks in advance, right? That's not a good place to be. So it is very important for them to get this ban list right, because whatever they decide in, what is today, the 24th, whatever they decide is going to be our format for the next 6 months. So we are going to be playing with whatever they give us until 2026, more or less. And if they take another half-assed whack at, blue black reanimator, and hey, it's still the top deck in the format, we're going to be in this same place again for the next 6 months, which kind of makes me dread this ban update more so than I think prior ones, just because it has a asterisk of a longer time frame associated with it, just because of where EW falls on the calendar. Other thoughts? I feel like the other deck that I worry about a lot that's not there is Nadu. I've waxed a lot poetic a lot about how the blue black reanimator deck is this hybrid. Nadu is kind of a hybrid deck too. It looks kind of like a control deck that also just like has an oops I win button, and is also just not a very fun play pattern. I think it kind of skates under the radar because the blue black tempo deck is probably just the better hybrid than Nadu. But if Reanimator actually falls off, then I think that those people who are having like who love this hybrid deck type are probably going to naturally flex into Nadu, because that's the only other thing that's kind of like that. So I suppose a fear is that even if Reanimator gets banned, we're just stuck with Nadu for the next 6 months, which is also not something that I particularly look forward to, but it's whatever. So yeah, those were just my ban thoughts. I sure hope they get it right, is all I'm gonna say, because I love Legacy, but I don't know if I want to play this particular Legacy for the next 6 months. And if all they do is whack out, Bowmaster or something, and Reanimator just slots in, I don't know, like Baragoi, for instance, and we're just staring at these numbers again until 2026. Like I, I need a little variety, right? So yeah. Anyway, thanks for listening. Have a good night, everyone. All right. Bye bye.